The assassin killed a couple of people during the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was fought in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia between November 1st, 1955 and April 30th, 1975, when Saigon fell. It was the second Indochina War and a crucial war in the Cold War. Although officially fought between North and South Vietnam, the North was supported by the Soviet Union, China, and other communist states, while the South was supported by the United States and other anti-communist allies, turning the conflict into a proxy war between the two. It lasted nearly 2 decades, with direct U.S. military involvement ending in 1973. The fighting also spilled over into neighboring nations, intensifying the Laotian and Cambodian civil wars, which ended with all 3 countries formally becoming communist governments in 1976. The conflict took a massive human toll. Estimates of the number of Vietnamese military and civilian deaths ranged from 966,000 to 3 million. The fighting claimed the lives of between 275,000 and 310,000 Cambodians, between 20,000 and 62,000 Laotians, and 58,220 U.S. service members. The end of the Vietnam War triggered the Vietnamese refugee crisis and the Indochina refugee crisis, in which millions of refugees fled Indochina, with an estimated 250,000 dying at sea. Once in power, the Khmer Rouge committed the Cambodian genocide, and the war between them and a unified Vietnam eventually evolved into the Cambodia-Vietnam War, which overthrew the Khmer Rouge government in 1979 and ended the genocide. In retaliation, China invaded Vietnam, resulting in a border war that lasted until 1991. In the United States, the war sparked what became known as the Vietnam Syndrome, a public aversion to American military involvement abroad that, along with the Watergate incident, contributed to the crisis of confidence that gripped the United States during the 1970s. The U.S. Air Force destroyed more than 20% of South Vietnam's jungles and between 20% and 50% of its mangroves, spraying approximately 20 million U.S. gallons of poisonous herbicides, including Agent Orange. The battle is one of the most frequently cited examples of ecocide. Operation Catching the Axe during the Vietnam War. A Hatchet Force, or Hatchet Unit, was a special operations unit composed of U.S. and sub-Vietnamese MACW and SOG troops that conducted small, clandestine operations along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, beginning in 1966. The forces specialized in search and destroy missions, as well as the recovery of missing U.S. service members in Laos, Cambodia, and northern Vietnam. Hatchet Force teams operated in small groups of 3 U.S. Special Forces soldiers and 20 to 40 local soldiers, scouting border areas for conflict. Hatchet Force teams remained active until each field command was disbanded. They operated from Firebase 3 during the siege of Khe Sanh, a U.S. Marine Corps airstrip. While the Hatchet team consisted of 6 U.S. Special Forces and 32 indigenous soldiers, the base housed 131 Americans and 457 indigenous Special Commando units. Axe teams served as strike forces, operating in the jungle against targets identified by reconnaissance teams operating out of Khe Sanh. On December 30th, 1968, a 40-man Axe team, led by First Lieutenant James R. Gerson, was sent 1 mile east of the Laos-Cambodia border to search for missing Sergeant Robert Francis Sheridan. The Axe team detonated a claymore and was ambushed by 2 company-sized North Vietnamese troops. 3.5 hours later, the Axe team managed to clear a landing zone from which they were evacuated, with a 50% fatality rate, including Gerson. Gerson's second-in-command, Robert L. Howard, later received the Medal of Honor. A second Highlander squad was sent in January 1969 and spent 4 days searching for Sheridan before being killed in a helicopter crash shortly after extraction. Sheridan remains listed as missing in action. On June 23, 1971, an Axe team was deployed 60 miles west-southwest of Da Nang, 5 miles from the Laotian-Cambodian border. They were tasked with locating Madison Alexander Stroline, a sergeant assigned to a four-man Halo squad the previous day. The Axe team found a CAR-15 rifle and a parachute at the base of a tree. However, Stroline was missing and could not be found. There were no traces of blood or bandages. Stroline is still listed as missing in action. Between September 11th and 13th, 1970, an Axe force led a secret raid into southern Laos to create a diversion for the Royal Laotian Army's assault on the People's Army of Vietnam. The mission, led by Captain Eugene McCarley, consisted of 16 Americans. Despite continuous contact with the enemy, caches of equipment and dispositions belonging to enemy units were discovered and bombed from the air, and 2 boxes of intelligence were recovered. The Axe force was subsequently split into 3 teams and evacuated with at least 54 People's Army men killed. From cover to cover, the United States had never fought a war like Vietnam. It was a complex struggle that lasted more than 40 years. The United States was active in the last 9 years of the conflict, which ended with the humiliating mass withdrawal of U.S. forces from the country in 1973. Throughout the war, U.S. troop casualties are estimated at around 58,000 killed and more than 300,000 wounded, with nearly 10,000 aircraft and helicopters lost. It was, at times, an extremely unusual conflict, with few planned battles and only occasional but intense air operations. Despite the emergence of high-tech weapons such as surface-to-air missiles, SAMs, dedicated attack helicopters, and the widespread use of guided missiles, the fighting remained raw and dirty. The demand for special forces had never been greater. Many brave and great men served in Vietnam, and among these courageous soldiers was Jerry Mad Dog Shriver of the U.S. Special Forces 5th Division. He was born on September 24, 1941, in the small resort town of Defuniak Springs, Florida. Little is known about Shriver's life, and his biography begins when he joined the Army at a young age. He arrived in Vietnam in 1966, having reached the rank of First Sergeant. He eventually led a platoon of the 5th Division's Special Forces, an unorthodox task force charged with carrying out top-secret missions throughout the Southeast Asian theater during the Vietnam War. The team's primary responsibility was to conduct deep infiltration missions beyond enemy lines, followed by dangerous strategic reconnaissance and interdiction duties. Much of Shriver's work with MACV, SOG, may never be known because the missions were highly classified and often took place in countries where they were not permitted. However, the honors he received were a testament to his bravery, dedication to duty, and successes. Throughout his short life, he received 2 Silver Stars, 3 Army Commendation for Valor Medals, 7 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, an Air Medal, and a Soldier's Medal. His reputation was such that Hanoi Hannah nicknamed him Mad Dog, and the North Vietnamese government seemed so terrified of him that they offered a $10,000 reward for his capture. It was claimed that by his 3rd tour of duty, Shriver had become unstable and antisocial. He had even begun drinking heavily and reportedly had difficulty sleeping. It was even claimed that he slept with his suppressed M3A1 submachine gun under his pillow. About Jerry M. Shriver. If you read many novels about Vietnam or watch movies about it, you're likely to encounter a character who has become a caricature of the subgenre. Before Vietnam, this caricature rarely, if ever, appeared in movies or fiction. The character is eccentric on a good day and insane the rest of the time. He's almost impervious to rules, etiquette, rank, and military customs. He wouldn't last a day in a professional military force unless he was an effective killing machine in the field. When he's on the battlefield, he's almost like a superhero. He has the hearing and smell of a dog, the vision of an eagle, and the longevity of a cat. His instincts go far beyond Sergeant Rock's combat antenna. He's fearless in a fight, probably because no one is more terrifying than him. He rarely shows up at the garrison, but when he does, he's the peacetime Rear Sergeant Major's nightmare. In short, he's the peacetime Rear Echelon Sergeant Major's nightmare. In short, he's more of a warrior than a soldier, and probably as insane as the Vietnam War itself. At least that's how he appears to the average civilian. This stereotype had an archetype, but you could call it a prototype. This recurring character bears a strong resemblance to real-life special operators on SOG teams and reconnaissance projects in Vietnam. The most famous and iconic of these operators was Jerry Mad Dog Shriver. According to Paul Longweir, who served alongside Shriver and wore his Montagnard wristband for years after Vietnam, meeting Shriver didn't necessarily mean getting to know him. He was just that crazy. In our thumbnail, Jerry Shriver is the man in the highlighted red circle. He looks like he's having fun staring at the camera, but the Vietnam War was tough and ugly, and these soldiers always expected the worst. Jim Fleming. James Philip Fleming is a former U.S. Air Force pilot who fought in the Vietnam War. Born in Sedalia, Missouri, he received the Medal of Honor for rescuing a 6-man reconnaissance unit from McKeeby SOG trapped between well-guarded enemy positions in Duck Cove, Vietnam in 1968. In 1968, Fleming was the aircraft commander of a UH-1F transport helicopter deployed with the 22nd Special Operations Squadron at Van Me Thuot West Airfield in the Republic of Vietnam. On November 26th, a 6-man U.S. Army Special Forces reconnaissance unit was airlifted to the western highlands of Vietnam near the Cambodian border and about 30 miles west of Pleiku. Hours later, they were trapped beside a river with enemy forces on 3 sides. An Air Force Forward Air Controller received the team leader's request for an emergency evacuation, and the 5 helicopters in the region, despite being low on fuel, flew to the coordinates while the controller briefed them on the situation. The Green Berets were attacked by 6 heavy machine guns and an unspecified number of hostile soldiers. When the helicopters spotted the team's smoke, the gunships opened fire, eliminating 2 machine gun positions. One of the helicopters was hit and crashed into the river, and its crew was picked up by another transport. A second truck, low on fuel, had to withdraw from the formation and return to base. Only 2 helicopters remained, Fleming's and another that was almost out of ammunition. Fleming, hovering just above the treetops of the forest, investigated the only clearing close enough for the men to access, and found that landing there was difficult. Instead, he flew over the river, hovering just above the water with his landing skids against the bank, hoping the Special Forces troops could safely run the few meters needed to reach his helicopter. Besides exposing his aircraft to enemy fire, this maneuver required exceptional piloting skill. After a few minutes, the radio reconnaissance team realized they couldn't reach the helicopter. Fleming pulled his UH-1 out of range of enemy fire. The air controller ordered the Green Berets to detonate their explosives, while Fleming made one last attempt to save them. When the mines exploded, he lowered his helicopter and balanced it against the riverbank, providing the Green Berets with an open cargo door through which to jump safely. Hostile soldiers concentrated their fire on the UH-1. The Green Berets rushed toward the helicopter, firing as they advanced and killing 3 Viet Cong within 10 feet of the aircraft. Jumping through the cargo door, Fleming returned to Human Was Fawn. He backed the helicopter away from the riverbank and flew down the river to safety. Fleming successfully took off despite a hail of hostile fire and landed safely at a forward operating base. Captain Fleming's genuine concern for his fellow soldiers and his willingness to go above and beyond the call of duty are consistent with the finest traditions of the United States Air Force and reflect well on him and his country's armed forces. Weaponry. The North Vietnamese Army, the Viet Cong, the Republic of Vietnam Army, the United States Armed Forces, the Republic of Korea Armed Forces, the Philippine Armed Forces, the Royal Thai Armed Forces, the Australian Defence Force, and the New Zealand Defence Force fought in the Vietnam War, along with a variety of irregular troops. Nearly all of the United States' allied forces were equipped with American weaponry such as the M1 Garand, the M1 Carbine, the M14 rifle, and the M16 rifle. The 7.62mm L1A1 self-loading rifle was the service rifle for the Australian and New Zealand military forces. The M16 rifle was occasionally used. Although the PAVN inherited various American, French, and Japanese armaments from World War II and the First Indochina War, they were primarily equipped and supplied by the People's Republic of China, the Soviet Union, and their Warsaw Pact allies. In addition, North Vietnam developed several weapons, including anti-personnel explosives, the K-50M, and homemade copies of the RPG-2. By 1969, the U.S. Army had classified 40 types of rifles, 22 types of machine guns, 17 types of mortars, 20 types of recoilless rocket or grenade launchers, 9 anti-tank weapons, and 14 anti-aircraft artillery weapons for deployment by ground troops on all sides. Anti-communist forces also used 24 varieties of armored vehicles and self-propelled artillery, as well as 26 types of field artillery and rocket launchers. The Vietnam War was the first conflict to see the widespread tactical deployment of helicopters. The Bell UH-1 Iroquois, nicknamed Huey, was widely deployed in counterinsurgency operations, both as a troop transport and as a gunship. In the latter role, it was armed with a variety of weapons, including M60 machine guns, 7.62 mm multi-barreled miniguns, and unguided air-to-surface rockets. The Hueys were also used effectively for medevac and search and rescue missions. The AC-130 Spectre gunship and the UH-1 Huey gunship were two aircraft that played important roles during the war. The AC-130 was a heavily armed ground attack aircraft based on the C-130 Hercules transport plane. It was used for close air support, air interdiction, and force protection. The AC-130H Spectre was equipped with two M60 Vulcan cannons and one 20 mm cannon, a 40 mm Bofors autocannon, and two 105 mm M100 howitzers. The Huey was a single-engine turbojet military helicopter, and approximately 7,000 UH-1s saw action in Vietnam. Ground forces had access to B-52s, F-4 Phantom IIs, and other aircraft capable of dropping napalm, white phosphorus, tear gas, and chemical weapons. During the war, aircraft munitions included precision-guided munitions, cluster bombs, and a gelling thickening agent mixed with petroleum or a similar fuel for use in an incendiary device, initially against buildings and later primarily as an anti-personnel weapon that adhered to the skin and could burn to the bone. The Claymore M18A1, an anti-personnel mine, was widely used and was command-guided and detonated, firing 700 steel pellets into the lethal zone. Guerrilla warfare and the use of chemical weapons resulted in widespread and severe deaths on both sides during this long war. This revelation was widely televised, inciting anti-war protests and lowering the morale of Americans fighting in Vietnam. MACV SOG. Jerry Mad Dog Shriver made dozens of covert trips to Laos and Cambodia before his luck ran out. He was undoubtedly the most experienced and well-known reconnaissance man in the SOG. By the late 1960s, no Special Forces warrior at Fort Bragg would even mention the top-secret initials SOG. But everyone knew the renowned leader of the Green Beret reconnaissance team in the Studies and Observations Group, First Sergeant Jerry Schreiber, nicknamed Mad Dog by Radio Hanoi. Jerry Schreiber had delivered the most famous response in SOG history, radioing his superiors to tell them not to worry because North Vietnamese forces had surrounded his small team. No, he said, I have them right where I want them, surrounded from within. Closest companion. There was no one like Mad Dog Shriver. Jim Fleming, Medal of Honor recipient, who flew the USAF judges for SOG, described him as the archetypal lone warrior, antisocial and obsessed with what he was doing. Shriver rarely spoke and would spend days pacing the camp in the same clothes. While sleeping, he would cradle a loaded rifle, and at the clubhouse, he would buy a six-pack of beer, open every can, and go off to a corner alone to drink them all. Although he had received a Silver Star, 5 Bronze Stars, and the Soldier's Medal, the 28-year-old Green Beret wasn't concerned with honors. He cared about the Hill tribesmen and spent all his money on them, even collecting food, clothing, and anything else people offered to distribute in the backyard communities. He was the only American living in the Hill tribesmen's barracks. The Hill tribesmen treated him almost irreverently. Schreiber's closest companion was a German shepherd named Klaus, whom he had brought back from Taiwan. Klaus became ill after drinking beer one night, and some reconnaissance men fed him before he defecated on the floor of the NCO's club. They wiped his nose before kicking him out. Schreiber arrived, grabbed a beer, took off his blue velvet jacket and derby hat, placed a .38 pistol on a table, then lowered his trousers and defecated on the floor, daring anyone to wipe his nose on the floor. Everyone pretended not to hear him, but a man who had given Klaus beer begged the reconnaissance company commander to intervene. The captain laughed in his face. Lost. Never seen again. On April 24, 1969, a platoon-sized squad of U.S. and South Vietnamese forces infiltrated by helicopter into Kampong Cham province, Cambodia, for a combat mission. As they advanced from their landing zone to the initial rendezvous point, they encountered heavy fire from a numerically superior enemy. A prolonged firefight ensued. Repeated airstrikes were launched on enemy positions, but the remaining men of the unit had to be evacuated from the landing zone. The continued enemy fire hampered the recovery of the killed and missing team members. When the crew was attacked, Schreiber was seen falling back away from the others toward a line of trees on the outskirts of the landing zone. Another team member attempted to contact him by radio, but the connection was lost within minutes, and Schreiber was never seen again. The team was forced to leave the region without him, and subsequent searches failed to locate him. His whereabouts remain unknown. The United States Army promoted First Sergeant Schreiber to the rank of Sergeant Major following the incident, while he was still considered missing in action. Today, Sergeant Major Schreiber is commemorated in the Missing Persons Court at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific. His name, along with those of all his fallen comrades, is inscribed on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. Award. The President of the United States of America awarded the Silver Star to Staff Sergeant Jerry Michael Schreiber for outstanding gallantry and courage in battle while serving in the Republic of Vietnam. Schreiber distinguished himself on October 27, 1966, while serving as assistant team leader for a 4-man Special Forces reconnaissance squad on a combat operation in hostile territory. While moving through the forest, his team was ambushed by a numerically superior Viet Cong force. Sergeant Schreiber and his troops managed to repel the initial attack and quickly withdrew to a defensive perimeter. He then left the cordon to approach the body of a fallen rebel to gather intelligence. He fell back, passing within 10 meters of 2 rebels after the Viet Cong removed all equipment from the body. He attempted to contact friendly forces by radio, but was unable to do so due to the dense terrain. Opposing forces quickly surrounded his team, but he fired heavily at them and repelled their numerous probes. Finally establishing contact, he ordered airstrikes on the Viet Cong strongholds to support evacuation efforts. Due to the terrain and the intense firefight, the helicopters could only lift 1 person at a time. Sergeant Schreiber volunteered to remain on the ground to cover the operations and directed lethal fire on the concentrated attacks by hostile soldiers. Ignoring the hail of bullets flying around him, he fought fiercely. He fought bravely until all his men were aboard and safe. It takes courage to fight in wars like the Vietnam War, but Mad Dog Schreiber went beyond bravery. What do you think of him? Why not let us know in the comments below? Well, that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give us a like and let us know what you think in the comments. Check out our other videos and subscribe to be part of the fun. Click the notification icon so you can see our new videos as soon as they're uploaded. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.